Hey everyone, it's Aspen, your host for Forestry Talks, a podcast that explores all things forestry in Alberta. I'm really excited to be here on site at the Banff Fairmont Springs Hotel for our 82nd annual general meeting and conference. We've got a ton of great guests here. There's so much networking. We're having a great time, and I'm really looking forward to bringing some of those guests on this show for you to listen to. So stay tuned. We're going to have a great week. I can't wait to share it with you. Hey folks, really excited to be continuing our AGM series. This week, I'm really pleased to have Kathy Abusow, the President and CEO of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, join me for the conversation. Kathy, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I just came off a wonderful session here in beautiful Banff, and so pleased to be here participating with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to dig into your session. One of my favorite things about having, some of our guest speakers come onto the show is then I get to pick your brain about how that whole thing went. But before we get into that,
yes,
tell me what the Sustainable Forestry Initiative is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sustainable Forestry Initiative is a nonprofit charitable organization whose vision is a world that values and benefits from sustainably managed forests. So benefits from, there's all sorts of goods, services, values that we can all get from that. And how we work, we really try to advance sustainability through forest-focused collaboration. So we work with all sorts of individuals, organizations, forest product company, Indigenous groups, academics, conservationists to do some good work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think what's great about SFI is that people might have seen your logo all over the place, but they might not know exactly what it means. So where are people seeing your logo and why? What's that all about?
Awesome. Well, okay, so you're talking about the first sort of pillar of our work.
Yeah.
So we have 4 pillars of our work. First of all, standards, then conservation, then community, and then environmental education. And so in the standards pillar of our work, we run what's known as a forest certification standard.
Yeah.
And so experts come together to develop the standards and revise the standards, like 2,000 points of input to create a standard that people can then use in the forest, whether they're land managers or forest product companies. And that standard is then audited by a third-party audit that will check that the things have been done right in the forest. And so if you're a consumer and you see a coffee cup, a paper cup with the SFI logo on it, or if you see a ream of paper in one of the office supply stores, or at your Costco, a box that carries your products with the SFI label. It's about the fact that product is derived from a forest that has been well managed and has been certified or has been responsibly sourced. So just like you have fair trade coffee and these other sort of labels to give a designation of the credentials, this is just a good way to know that you're supporting responsible forestry. And, I think that's a great thing. Like, we all have a choice in what we buy, and that helps you support responsible forestry and support the great programs we do that support a lot of youth, a lot of young people, Indigenous relations, careers, all sorts of other fun things as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to dig into this one actually a little bit more even.
Yes.
Because I think, as a consumer, if you're seeing something like that, you're like, responsible forestry, that sounds really good. I like the idea that this is a sustainably managed forest. But what does that mean? What does to SFI when you're looking at, yes, this is a sustainably managed forest, what does that mean?
That's right. So the standard means that you've managed your lands responsibly. That means that you've harvested with sustainable harvest levels, you're promptly regenerating the forest, that you're maintaining water quality, you're using trained harvesters and logging professionals, that you've got Indigenous rights recognition and respecting traditional knowledge and values. Right now, we have 2 new provisions in our standards around climate smart forestry and fire resiliency and awareness. These are threats to our forests. And so we have requirements and performance measures around identifying identifying the risk of climate-based risks and putting practices in place to address those risks.
Yeah.
And these are all third-party audited. So there's these objectives, then performance measures, then indicators, and they're all audited to ensure that you're meeting what experts in their field consider to be responsibly well-managed forests.
Perfect. And, I love that you've also been able to add a couple more measures to that, because I think that speaks so true to I talk about this all the time in the forestry sector. We have such a culture of continuous improvement, right? Like there's always a desire to do better and apply the best science and all this kind of stuff. And so, even with the sustainability certifications that are out there, they're also improving and asking for more and expecting more. And people can trust that, there's a follow through there.
That's right. And there's there's the continual improvement aspect, which is important. And then there's new issues on the landscape. So from a continual improvement and relationship building aspect, for example, since before 2015, we've had requirements on Indigenous rights recognition. But what we did in this last revision of 2022 was said, you need to be trained in those rights.
Right.
You need to be aware of them, because it's not enough to say you're respecting them if you're not trained and training your people in them. And then, so then we provide resources for people to get trained.
Awesome.
And just since 2022, with our new standard, 32,000 employees of SFI certified orgs have had Indigenous rights training.
Wow.
That's the type of impact that we can have. So that's continual improvement. And when you've got that training and relationship training, you're entering into conversations in a more respectful way, and you're more likely to succeed in your relationship building. And then your relationship with the Indigenous community moves from transactional to relationship to building something together, which I think is really fundamental. Whereas our climate smart forestry requirements and our fire resiliency requirements, they've really been elevated because there's change on the landscape. So in our 2015 standard, which was the previous one, it was no climate risk in general, like learn, research, understand those things. Now it's like, okay, literally, we're on fire.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? What are the best management practices? How are we going to manage our forest differently to deal with catastrophic wildfire? And how are we going to, learn from other practices, whether it's prescribed fire, cultural burns, to sort of for good fire, to manage for those things. So when different things come onto the landscape, we definitely need to be addressing those and putting those requirements in place.
And so what I think is really interesting about SFI too is, of course, this is through like other parts of the supply chain than perhaps a lot of us would be exposed to, right? Like we're on the production side, but what about, more downstream? What do you hear from maybe customers and groups that are the companies that have the coffee cups and all that kind of stuff? Like, what are they looking for?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. And so, SFI has like a big hug, hug. So we work with everyone from land managers and landowners all the way through manufacturing and the supply and all of the parties that are involved in that, right through on the supply chain side to the brand owners and the brand managers. So those large, Fortune 500 companies, right?
Yeah.
So from a smaller landowner right to a large Fortune 500 company, that's what you're working with in the supply chain, which is pretty amazing. And so that's the excitement, is figuring out what do you need to do on the ground to manage our forest sustainably, but then also how do we work with customers in the supply chain to meet their needs, and also how do we modify our standard to provide the assurances that they're looking for. And so what's really interesting to me is I'm a big fan of progress and continual improvement, and I'd like to know that we're always learning and doing better, not just us, but the forest sector and those that utilize our standard. And so while we are excited about building new relationships and, fire smarting our forests and learning how to utilize our biodiversity habitat provisions to maintain and recover species, which is all about sort of nature positive things that we're doing to improve people's lives and the natural environment. customers are very caught up in risks that are in Canada and North America where we operate, there's a very low bar. They're very caught up in items like they don't want deforestation and they don't want degradation.
Yeah.
And in many countries in the world, that is great that they're caught up in that because there's real, risks of degradation and deforestation. Again, in North America, yes, we need to deal with things like climate and fire and practice around that, but we're not actively degrading our forest lands. And so we do need to constantly be reminded that where the world is versus where Canada and the US and the SFI is are often in different places. And so we're often having conversations about risks that customers don't want to take on.
Yeah.
And they're wanting to see sort of more requirements on those items, which is causing, quite frankly, it's well-intentioned. It's well-intentioned.
Oh, yeah.
We don't want deforestation. We don't want degradation either. But I'd rather see the funds and the investment going into forest restoration and community building, right? And because we don't have those risks in the same sort of levels that you have around the world. But so what we're busy doing is developing all of the assurances that forests certified to SFI do not contribute to deforestation and degradation. And we've done that. That's sort of been part of our DNA since the beginning. Yeah. But what we're having to do is spell it out with like clear definitions for them so they can see it, because they're not going to, they didn't take forestry degrees. They don't necessarily understand all of that. They want the words. They want to see you're not contributing to deforestation. So we're our board has approved definitions on deforestation and degradation. They're becoming part of that audit now. And they're already a part of the audit, but without the words in a definition. It was part of how you do sustainable forest management and how you work towards that. So that's a big part of our conversation reducing the risk in the supply chain right now. Yeah, for sure.
And so, I mean, Kathy, you've brought me really neatly to something else I wanted to get to in the conversation here, which is the European Union deforestation regulation. I'm wondering, so for anybody who doesn't know what that is, if you could maybe just give us a little bit of a sense of that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this is where I might lose your audience. So we'll try to make this as easy as possible. But EUDR is a regulation that has been put out and applies to the European Union and put out by the European Commission. And it requires that anything sold into, export into, or export out of the European Union, any product that does not contribute to deforestation, degradation. There needs to be a due diligence system in place. There needs to be geolocation in place to know where those products are coming from. And those requirements that came out, again, they are well-intentioned because we can all get behind zero deforestation and degradation. Absolutely. But it is causing an incredible amount of cost in work in places that are not high risk for these things. And so it was just announced last week that that they're proposing now to delay the implementation of the EUDR from the end of this year, 2024, to the end of next year, 2025, which gives a year for us to look at how do we streamline this to provide the assurances that are needed, which I think is a fair thing, in a way that's commensurate with the risk. And so more depth, more scrutiny, where there's greater risk, and more resources there. When where there's lesser risk, hopefully some of the systems that already exist, like forest certification alone, will be able to provide those assurances. And especially because we've put in those clean definitions, these cutoff dates and things that people want to know that you're not contributing to those within our standards now.
Yeah. And, it's been an interesting conversation because it really has been an exploration of the language that we're using and how we're talking about like what deforestation is, what degradation is. And it's interesting because I guess what I'm hearing is that in North America, not having deforestation and not having forest degradation is kind of par for the course. That's business as usual, right? Like we're focused on, wildfire management and looking after species at risk and, all of these other things. So if you can maybe just explain, why is it par for the course? Like, why is it business as usual that we've got forest degradation taken care of and.
Well, even wildfire risk, that does degrade, wildfires will degrade our forest, but then we engage in forest, regeneration and renewal and restoration. And there's that cycle, and wildfire can be a positive thing, or it can be catastrophic, and it can take more down within communities, like unfortunately just suffered that in Jasper, sadly, earlier this year. Mm-hmm. And so that does result in real degradation, but it's not human-induced degradation. Yeah. And this is what EUDR is after. Yeah. Human-induced degradation, which and that's where I would say we're in a good place here. Yeah. We're trying to prevent the natural sort of occurrence at a catastrophic level that's contributing to this degradation. But look, around the world there are these real issues that we need to contend with, and we can't be an organization that just pretends they don't exist. They do exist. We have to do our part at home, and I feel like we are, and we've got standards to do that. We have policy to do that, and we're working really well at it. And then we also, because we're in a better spot, we want to have the latitude to do more good with our forest, do more good with our communities, absolutely, contribute to, environmental, health and well-being, and community health and well-being, and jobs and livelihoods, and clean water and, clean air, and just to having a great place to live. And we get much more energized about how can we, work in this sector to sustain communities and do more good. And that's the gift that I have. We're being the head of SFI is we're working in North America. And so we get the luxury to step back and think about how can we contribute more positively to communities.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that, because I think we've talked about a little bit how SFI is, about North America, like that is the big hug that is SFI, or part of it, right? Is, we, on this show, we often talk about what's happening in Alberta, but SFI is not just Alberta, not just Canada, but North America.
Correct.
And there's a lot of differences between, forestry between Canada and the US. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that and some of the nuances there.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. There are. And I think that is also some of our secret. I will talk about some of the differences, but also some of the secret sauce is being able to focus on things that we can collaborate on and we can move forward on and agree on. Yeah. But there are definitely structural differences in Canada, predominantly public land. Of course, there's private landowners as well. But 94% or so of, maybe the last Canadian State of the Forest report says differently, but about 94% publicly held, right? And therefore, we have a responsibility to our communities to manage that resource in a way that benefits all communities, right? And that sort of goes back to our mission, a world that values and benefits from sustainably managed forests. Those public lands come with a social license to operate, and we have to remember we're not private landowners on a public land base, and I think that's a really important part, which is why there's so much policy, there's often so much regulation, and I think that is also the struggle, is figuring out how do you get the outcomes in a way that are going to be positive, and not always try to fix things through regulation, right? And some regulation is going to support managing our forest well, and others are going to it may impede it as well. In the U.S., of course, there's a lot of there's significant public land, but in terms of the forest product supply chain, the majority of it comes from private landowners, both large industrial as well as small family forest owners. And again, look, in Canada, I said 94% is public, but I just also want to recognize about 25% of the wood supply in Eastern Canada comes from small private landowners as well. So we have both, but just at different magnitudes. So what a private landowner feels about their property and how they're going to manage it, they don't have the same constraints as necessarily as public land. However, the constraints are becoming more and more similar because we do have, back to this fact, customers in the supply chains, investors as well in the supply chains, who they want to ensure that they're investing in socially responsible sectors, and so even private landowners also have pressures related to social license to operate that will more often than not come through their customer or their investor base, but different nonetheless than public lands.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about some of the other pillars, of course, that are part of SFI. And I think a big one is education.
Yes.
Do you want to maybe share with me a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. I would love to. So SFI's education program is founded on Project Learning Tree, which is a program that's been in existence for over 40 years in the U.S. and is under a sort of SFI's umbrella now. And then we started a new initiative in Canada in 2017 called Project Learning Tree Canada. And both sides of the border, Project Learning Tree or Project Learning Tree Canada, for short form, I'm just going to say sometimes PLT. PLT is really about a lifetime of learning. And so if it really starts with environmental education in the young years, using trees and forests as windows onto the world. So learning about the outdoors and exploring trees and forests. And in our kindergarten through grade 8 guide for educators to use, they already will start to link things to careers, like, hey, you like to splash in a puddle, maybe you want to be a hydrologist. Right. So it's just helping people understand from an early ages, that there are careers beyond, dentists, doctors, lawyers. All of these things are important in society, but just opening up the world to understanding nature around us, getting them connected with nature, getting them to understand our forests, how important they are to our lives, to the products that we use every day. And that's sort of the younger years stuff. And then we move into forest literacy. And it's really about, what do we expect by the time someone graduates in grade 12 or beyond, for them to know about our forests, about the role that they play, that they are a renewable resource, that they can be a climate sink, and but in times of great fire, they can be a source, right? That they can be managed to maintain wildlife and to support that, or they can be managed in a way that is going to undermine that. And of course, we feel that our standard contributes to the positive end of those things. So it's about, what is a forest literacy is really hoping that we have graduates that are forest literate, that whether they go into a job in the forest conservation sector, they understand the role of our forests and why we do, the benefits of managing them. And how managing those forests can really help us mitigate against, catastrophic wildfire, and how they can provide renewable resources, and how you have a choice in the products that you purchase, right? And then we move into what's known as our green career careers work. And it's really exciting work. In Canada specifically, we started to place young people between the ages of 15 to 30 and 4 to 16 week job experiences in the forest and conservation sector. I call it the forest and conservation sector because I see them intertwined. Frankly, I think we're, conserving so many values as we manage our forests every single day. And so they can seek green jobs in the forest and conservation sector. So since 2018, we've placed 7,500 or so young people in green jobs in the forest and conservation sector. They're like 4 to 16 weeks. Some of them go up to a year, depending on if they're still school, but they're for everyone. They might have a PhD, or they might be a high school dropout. They may never have, completed a certificate program. We meet people where they're at, and then try to provide the skills development and the training to get them workforce ready for a green job experience. And what's really exciting about that is out of the 7,500 youth, over 15% are Indigenous youth that have. Many of them are working still in their own communities in these green jobs experiences, and over 50% are women in the workforce in the forest sector. We can do better in that space, and we're increasingly working with new Canadians, and also with youth with disabilities. And a disability, mental health issues are a disability, and as well, and so. Part of solving for our challenges today in mental health are connecting people to the outdoors and being able to connect with nature, being able to understand the benefits of a walk in the woods, and then also being able to explore careers and jobs in those things, and in forests or in the forest sector. And so we really believe that we are a great social service, but we don't do this alone. We work with 400 employers to do this. In Canada, we support youth from over 100 Indigenous communities. We work with the forest sector. We work with Canadian Parks Council. We work with government agencies, with academic institutions, just so that there's no wrong door for a young person. That our forests are everywhere. And so there are jobs everywhere to support that. And so that's really, really exciting. And in terms of forests everywhere, it's a new thing that I do want to segue to in a moment is a new standard that we have for urban forests, but I'm happy to talk a little bit more about Project Learning Tree and the lifetime of learning a bit as well. But
okay, you'll have to bring me back to that one.
I will.
Because I really love, it's such a fabulous educational model that you do have there. And in particular, one of the things that I've always really appreciated is the mentorship component and matching up with the mentors. And that's something that, I've had the pleasure of connecting with. And so there was actually an individual that I was connected with from Ontario that never in my life would our, paths have crossed prior to this, but it was such a fantastic way to build on that network and that community that is the broader forestry community, because it is such a small kind of family in a way. And just, a really fabulous component of the program.
Thank you. Yes, so our Career Pathways program includes job experiences, forestry skills development, and mentorship. And just on the Indigenous panel, we heard about earlier today the importance of mentorship. And we, our mentorship program is really, really exciting. And it's supporting people in their career paths, but it's also just, again, meeting people where they're at. So it doesn't matter. They could be, really learning about someone else's job in the sector, or they could just say, you know what, I don't have the courage to even reach out to ask for employment. They say they say that there's a workforce crisis. I don't even know how to get up the courage to apply for a job. And so they're not psychologist mentors, but they can certainly help people with their communications, their LinkedIn, things like that. So again, depending on where people are, that mentorship program has been fantastic. And what's really cool is it's across Canada. And we had one across the US. And for the first time, we've just launched a North American mentorship program. So again, again, it'll enhance relationships and learning where you can have a mentor from, a different place in North America, which is really cool. But people love the mentorship program. And a lot of people, it really started off during those times of COVID as well. And a lot of people felt lost, felt disconnected, and the mentorship program connected them to a greater community. So it's not just a relationship between two people, which is a two-way street in mentorship. I love being a mentor. I've been privileged as a mentee throughout my career, but I love being a mentor because it keeps me plugged into the challenges that people are having. And also I learn so much from mentees as well. So it keeps me fresh and young, if you will, in a way. Yeah. But we also connect people together through these events where all mentors and mentees can come together. So then they're creating a network, and we run our mentorship programs as cohorts, but we also do a cohort at our conference every year. And this year we had over 200 applicants, youth applicants, just alone to participate. We had funding to support, I think, about 50 or 60 of them, somewhere around there. And we ran a mentorship program at our when we do every year, ran a program at our conference. 68% of the participants identified as coming from a diverse community, first of all. So we're bringing new people into this space. And when we bring them together at a conference or an event like this, we're also creating a young network. Yeah. So we're actually putting a lot of work into saying, here's 60 of you or 40 of you or 50 of you. You're coming together as young people. Yeah. Now get to know each other. Yeah. And we really create those opportunities, and they stay in touch. And so then as they progress in their careers, just like us old people, we got networks. And we want to share those networks with the younger generation. But we want the younger generation to create their own network as well. And their own safe places. And I think that's what our mentorship program is doing as well. So it's helping on the one-on-one, but it's helping you connect with many people, which is really cool.
Well, and creating this community is so important because, for those individuals that are able to build that network, when they're in the workforce, 1, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever that turns out to be down the road, and they've got a question or a problem, they can say, hey, you know what? Like, you also are, however many years into your program. Have you experienced this? Like, this is what I'm feeling. So it's so powerful that that's something that you are being so intentional to facilitate.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Despite being 57, I can still remember when I was 17. So, and I think that's one of the nice things is you remember, the things that you struggled with and also, even when I did get a job and I was in the sector at the time, I was the only woman in the room ever. Yeah. Ever. Like, honestly, now and again, there might be another woman in a room of 40 men. And so it doesn't seem like too long ago when I remembered some of the challenges that I had, whether it was just because I was a young person or because I was a woman in the workforce in this sector. And again, back to continual improvement. What I love is this sector is really working so hard at being a welcoming sector. We can do all the recruitment we want. We have to retain people, and we can only retain people by being welcoming and by training the existing workforce to open up their minds to new ways of thinking. Because this generation comes in with new ways of thinking and new ways of learning, and we can benefit from this generation. And so we train the young people coming in, but we also work with the employers to train the people that are hosting the new entrants on really just hearing them, giving them those opportunities to share their ideas and really following through on those. So, which is fun.
So Kathy, I'm curious from kind of a bird's eye view of this whole thing, of all of the great educational work that SFI is doing, paired with, the prevalence of conversations around climate and wildfire management and some of those really important values of sustainability, especially that we're seeing coming out of a new generation. How are you seeing the conversation about forestry change?
Yeah, well, thank you. We're we're trying to change the conversation about forestry. We're trying to communicate to this generation, if you care about the environment, if you care about clean water, if you care about climate change, if, come work in the forest sector.
Yeah.
This is a sector that can solve for these problems, and you who are caring about these issues can work in this sector to change the way it works, but also recognize that it's changing the way it works as we're continually improving as well. But so many of the issues, like we talk about, again, like environmental crises, could it be species decline or climate change, mental health, not a social challenge. So many of these challenges can be addressed by connecting with this forest sector and working together and building it together. So I do think, we, call this a green job, and that's founded in the fact that it's a renewable resource that's working on climate resiliency, on species maintenance, on Indigenous rights recognition. These are all things that the young people care about.
Yeah.
And I think they only think about, some of them, that's where you cut trees, and don't realize that, 1% of the landscape at any given time is where harvesting is happening.
Yeah.
The other 99% of the landscape is there serving other values that also are needing to be managed, watershed values or wildlife habitat values or traditional values or knowledge. And so there's so much work that goes on this landscape, and so many jobs affiliated with it, that we're trying to help them understand, that there's a lot of opportunity here.
Yeah.
And now technology, it's fun and innovation, and there's so many cool products, right, that are coming out. Now we've got forest products that are glass and, and things like, it's really cool.
It is
really
brilliant. Cool. Yeah. And so for those of us that work in the forest sector or live in close proximity to the forest, we have maybe a little bit of a better understanding about what's actually happening. But perhaps in the urban environments, there's some more opportunity to really share and be loud and proud about what we're doing here. And so maybe for a really, hopefully neat and tidy segue into the urban forests, Kathy.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I think that is important. Thank you. That was a great segue. I appreciate circling back to that. So 80% of our populations here in Canada and the US live in urban places. And often the way voting is done as well, that influences outcomes. But just generally, 80% of our populations live in urban spaces, and we want to connect with those people. Back to forest literacy, even though we say it's what we hope someone in grade 12 graduates with. Yeah, the reality is we don't have a forest literate society, and I believe that urban forestry is a place where we can connect people to trees and forests, and we can have an entry point to talk about forests overall, and where we can do educational work as well. So SFI spent 2.5 years with an urban forestry task force and lots of public comments taken from all experts and walks of life and different societal contexts, to develop the SFI Urban and Community Forest Sustainability Standard. And that standard was just, launched, and it's very, very exciting because it can be used anywhere. It can be used in a municipality. It can be used at a healthcare institution. It can be used on one of my favorite, a university campus, where people can, and it's different than our other standards because it's really user friendly. It's broken into quadrants, and the first quadrant is about people, and it's all about how do you connect with people, and how do you connect with diverse people from different communities, and how do you understand what their priorities are, whether that priority could be mountain biking or whatever the priorities are, and how do you fashion an urban forest to enable people to live in it, work in it, pass through it, spend time with family in it, do community things and events in it, and have education, hopefully Project Learning Tree education in these urban forests, where you can be doing all sorts of interactive activities, learning about trees and forests taken from our KDA guides and our forest literacy work. And so that starts with people. And then we have environmental leadership. Then we have climate resiliency and disaster readiness. And then we have sort of the nuts and bolts of managing an urban forest. So we have 4 different quadrants, and it's all very user-friendly in terms of the language, and people can get certified to one quadrant only because they're working on it and can work their way through all 4 quadrants, or really sort of come in and what's important to them. But there's in all of them, there's some no matter which quadrant you choose to get certified to, there's nuts and bolts about that you have to do no matter what to be credible. But we're really excited by it, and we do think it's a great way to obviously bring understanding to the importance of forests to an urban population, and hopefully have a foundation to get people excited about the forest sector overall. And again, allow people that no wrong door. If they want to continue to live in a city, well, there's jobs there in a city in urban forestry. But maybe as a result of that, they'll learn about other types of forest opportunities where more reasonable rent may be, or something like that, and work in more large scale forest management. So we're really excited about it.
Absolutely,
it's a neat way to sort of knit our standards, our conservation leadership, community engagement, and education all in one place. And so that's the sort of the latest and greatest at SFI that we're quite excited by.
That is so, fantastic. And Kathy, this has been a ton of fun. I'm not even sure that we got to cover all of the pillars of SFI's work. So we may have to have a part 2 of this conversation.
Awesome.
But I just want to maybe see if any closing thoughts that you want to share, or if people want to learn a little bit more about any of your great programs, maybe how they can learn more.
Yeah, I would like, I think I might have started a little bit on Indigenous relations. I wouldn't mind saying that we're very interested in helping support relationship building with Indigenous communities. And really looking at Indigenous community self-determined priorities and where some of our programming may support them. That's great. And also developing relationships between a non-Indigenous forest sector communities and Indigenous ones. So I just want people to know that, and then and it's a serious place of our work. And then our website, forests, like plural, FORESTS.org, so pretty good website, is where you can learn about our education programs, conservation programs, standards, community, etc. So you can just go there. And if you have little ones, you definitely want to go into our PLT Canada through our education window, or through pltcanada.org or plt.org in the US, and get some of those kindergarten through grade 8 guides and gift them to your teachers. Everyone's always looking for year-end gifts for teachers and educators. Buy up some of those guides, gift them. They're full of activities, and they can also do some professional development if they're interested in how to use those guides with us online. But that's a great year-end or beginning of the year teacher gift for folks. So
perfect.
Awesome.
Right on. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Aspen. I appreciate it. I love your name.
It's perfect for the
industry. And I'm wearing a poplar here. There we go.
There you go.
That's right. So awesome. Well, thank you so much. Take care. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Forestry Talks, a podcast that explores all things forestry in Alberta. If you're curious to learn more, check out our website, albertaforestproducts.ca or loveabforest.ca. I'm your host, Aspen Dudzik, and I'll see you next time.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.